Let's go ahead and get started with our first story, which is this issue here with Daniel Penny. So for those who are not aware, there was a gentleman on the subway named Jordan Neely. Daniel Penny and a couple of others felt like he was being irate. They say that they felt threatened in some way, shape, or form. Daniel Penny chose to put Jordan Neely in a chokehold. There were 3 other men that were standing around Daniel, assisting to kind of keep Jordan down so that he would not move. And Jordan Neely died because of that chokehold. Well, Daniel Neely turned himself in. So I want to be clear. It's not like they, went to look for him. He turned himself into authorities. And I want to go ahead and get into that.
Here in New York, the subway rider who put a homeless man in a fatal chokehold is free on bail tonight after being arrested on a manslaughter charge. Stephanie Gosk has late details.
So I'm going to pause there. Notice that he said he is now free. Let's go on.
Protests and calls for criminal charges were answered. Daniel Penny was arrested for killing Jordan Neely. Early this morning, the 24-year-old walked into Manhattan's 5th Precinct.
He did so voluntarily and with the sort of dignity and integrity that is characteristic of his history of service to this grateful nation.
The former Marine is accused of manslaughter in the 2nd degree, a charge carrying a maximum 15-year sentence. Penny was released on $100,000 bail. Homeless and battling mental illness, Neely died after Penny put him in a chokehold on the subway nearly 2 weeks ago.
We just want to pause here because I want to go back because I just want to show you that obviously it was more than one person. You can see here that he did have some assistance. There were other gentlemen that were on the subway that were trying to hold Jordan Neely down. I don't know if those gentlemen will be asked to come in or to give a statement. I do not know. Right now, Daniel Penny was the only one who turned himself in. But as they just told you, he is now free on bail.
Cold on the subway nearly 2 weeks ago. A witness said Neely got on the train and started yelling that he was hungry and ready to die. According to Penny's attorney, Neely aggressively threatened his client and other people on the train, adding that he is confident that once all the facts and circumstances surrounding this tragic incident are brought to bear, Mr. Penny will be fully absolved of any wrongdoing.
Something that I've noticed with this story is that they continue to say that he threatened other people on the train, but they don't seem to tell you what he did that was threatening or what he said to other passengers on the subway that was threatening. They just say that he threatened other passengers on the train. So I'm sure more of that will come out in the court appearance, but I don't know. That's kind of weird to me that they're not stating that. Like, what was it that he actually said other than that he's hungry and he's ready to die?
But lawyers for Neely's family say Penny is guilty, and they aren't happy with the charge.
Yes, we disagree with the manslaughter charge. We think it should be murder because he knew it would happen. He knew he would die.
What is the difference between the manslaughter charge and a murder charge?
A murder charge is a specific intent crime. It means that you intended to kill someone. This manslaughter charge under New York law is about recklessness. It's about the conscious disregard of a known risk.
Penny's case will likely come down to a question of self-defense. New Yorkers are split, some calling him a heartless vigilante. Others say he is a hero. Either way, many agree record homelessness and a mental health crisis led to tragedy on the subway.
Now, I want to just say something about the way they are framing this incident. Notice how she said some are saying that he is a hero and some are calling him a vigilante. Why would there be that confusion? I honestly think part of the reason why there is that confusion is because the media is not telling us the whole story. We have seen this happen before, and I'll give you an example with the incident with Michael Brown. If you remember Michael Brown, he was the teenage boy that had his hands up and the police officer killed him, shot and killed him, left his body laying in the street. The media, even at that point in time, didn't tell us the entire story. Now, it was only later on, after a protest, that the mainstream media They interviewed the officer who shot Michael Brown, and the officer's account of the story was that Michael Brown reached for his gun. Now, that doesn't mean that was a reason for him to kill Michael Brown. But I also think it was pretty negligent of mainstream media to leave that particular piece of information out. And I want to prepare you because I have a feeling that this case is going to be similar in the way that they are not giving us key details about what happened on that subway. So don't be surprised if we have protests and more protests. There were some in New York, but if we have more protests and then it is revealed, oh, by the way, something else happened that mainstream media didn't mention. Still, to me, does not give him the reason to kill this guy or to put him in the chokehold. And these other gentlemen helping him too. But I want you to pay attention to the way that mainstream media, they do this on purpose, by the way. This is to get ratings and to rile up the people. So you'll keep coming back for more information about the story. Notice the way the mainstream media chooses to frame the narrative and how they choose to leave key pieces of information out. If you tell me that someone got onto the subway and they threatened the passengers, you need to tell me what they did that was so threatening. And I don't see them doing that.
Stephanie Gosk, NBC News, New York.
Okay. Now, he is being charged with manslaughter, and I want to talk about this. I've talked about it before on the show, but I want to be very clear when we mention manslaughter, right? So they told you this is not murder. Manslaughter can happen if the actions that you took caused the death of someone, but you did not intend to kill them. But there was a question that I had, and you can let me know how you feel about this. Daniel Penny was a former Marine. And as someone who grew up in a military family, one of the things that I learned when I was younger is that Marines are trained to kill with their bare hands, right? This is not a one-off. They are trained to do that. Since Daniel Penny used his hands, put him in a chokehold, and that killed Jordan Neely, could we say that his hands are technically a deadly weapon? Let's see what Cornell Law says about this. This is really interesting. A deadly weapon. A deadly weapon is an object, instrument, substance, or device which is intended to be used in a way that is likely to cause death, or which death can easily and readily be produced. A deadly weapon, this is the part that's important. I'm going to highlight this here because people may not be aware of this. I know about this because I took martial arts. A deadly weapon need not be a weapon in the traditional sense. For example, in Assers versus United States Supreme Court acknowledged that a large rock could be considered a deadly weapon when used by a defendant to strike the victim in the head, fracturing his skull. Some jurisdictions allow even more flexibility in the definition of a deadly weapon. For example, let me make this larger so you guys can see this. And I'm not a lawyer, but I just want to, we're going to go through what Cornell Law is saying here. For example, Texas court held in Stenol versus the state that a floor could be considered a deadly weapon when the defendant slammed the victim's head down upon it, and held in Turner versus state that hands and fists could be considered deadly weapons under certain circumstances. So this was the question that I had. Former Marine, trained to kill with his bare hands, used that and killed Jordan Neely, whether he intended to or not. Could they say that his hands are technically a deadly weapon? I want you to think about that, and we can talk about that more tonight on Call In. Now, let's go back into this manslaughter charge because I want us to take a look at why they charged him with manslaughter and not with murder. What is manslaughter and why Daniel Penny charged with it in Jordan Neely's death? Experts explain. Let's go down here. Why second-degree manslaughter? I think this charge makes a lot of sense from a charging standpoint. The DA would have three options. You have the basic murder charge, you have manslaughter, you have criminally negligent homicide. Now, we don't know what the grand jury is going to decide. This is just the initial charge for the arraignment. But the reason why this manslaughter charge was brought forward is because it's based on a recklessness standard. Was there a reckless and unjustifiable risk to human life? And that's going to be the question for the jury. So when you think about this incident that happened on the subway and you say this is messed up, that they're charging him with manslaughter and not murder, I want to explain to you why that is. I don't want you to just say, oh, they're giving him a lesser charge or for whatever reason. I want you to understand there's a difference between recklessness and intent. So if you intentionally seek out to kill someone, that's murder. If you happen to kill someone and you were not intending to, but they ended up dying because of your actions, that is considered manslaughter. Now let's go to this piece here. What is the difference between it and first-degree manslaughter? Remember, he's charged with second degree. First-degree manslaughter is an intentional act where a homicide occurs. The second degree is based on this recklessness standard. Was there an unjustifiable risk taken in this particular case? Was the chokehold a reckless act where the defendant didn't intend to kill Mr. Neely, but a death did occur by this reckless act? And that's what the jury is going to have to tackle when they are looking at this. With a murder charge, we're looking at intentional acts. There was an intent to cause death or that someone acted with depraved indifference. The big difference here is that the prosecutor has decided that there was not an intent to cause death, but that Mr. Penny was aware of and disregarded the risk of the death. What is the sentence for second-degree manslaughter? For a first-time felony offender, in this case, it would be 15 years in prison. So I wanted to break that down to you because, again, this is not how I feel about this particular issue. This is what the law says. So just keep that in mind. So it seems like to me, from what I've been hearing from people, a lot of people have a problem with the law. Not just this particular case, but the law. Cornell Law also tells us when we talk about manslaughter, manslaughter is the unlawful killing of a human being without malice. It is of two kinds: voluntary, upon a sudden quarrel or heat of passion; involuntary, in the commission of an unlawful act not amounting to a felony, or in the commission in an unlawful manner, or without due caution or circumspection of a lawful act which might produce death. So I want to give you an example that happened here in Massachusetts. A couple of years ago, there was a teenage boy. I think he had just turned 18. He was leaving work, worked at the grocery store in Haverhill. He was leaving work, got into his car. While he was driving home, his phone rang. He looked down at his phone. Actually, it was a text message. He got a text message. He looked down at his phone. In that split second, when he looked down at his phone, he actually hit the car in front of him. That car ran off the road and the people in the car died. Now, some people in Massachusetts felt like it was unfair to charge him with manslaughter, but they did. And the reason that they were able to give is that we realize he did not have the intent of killing those passengers that were the vehicle in front of him, but he was negligent because he chose to look down at his phone at a text message, which in Massachusetts you were not supposed to do. No texting and driving. Because of his reckless behavior, that is what led to the accident And the accident is what caused the death of the passengers in the vehicle in front of him. He was found guilty. 18 years old. That was a big story here because people are like, oh my God, this kid just lost his whole life because he made one mistake. But you have to understand, that's all it takes sometimes. That's all it takes. And they were able to argue that it was recklessness. So we don't know what's going to happen with this particular case. We don't know how the jury is going to look at it. But what I do know is that Eric Adams was recently, questioned about this incident in the subway. Now, Eric Adams is the mayor of New York City, and I want to show you his response to this as well.
I wanted to go back to your remarks on Jordan Neely's killing. I know you focused a lot on his mental health challenges and some of the services, but it was ultimately a chokehold that killed him, a chokehold from another strap hanger. Do you think Daniel Penny, who I know you didn't mention in yesterday's speech, you didn't mention how he died or whose hands he died as the cause of, do you think that that was an appropriate reaction from a fellow strap hanger to someone who didn't seem to have a weapon, to someone who's experiencing a mental health crisis on a subway car?
Okay, so she is asking Mayor Adams, the reporter, you can't see her, but the reporter is asking Mayor Adams, do you think that Daniel Penny's response to Jordan Neely was justified, considering the fact that he did not have a weapon and he was also going through a mental health crisis? Listen to what Eric Adams says.
I think it's important not to interfere as the mayor of the city in those parts that the police department has yet to take their action. The police
No. Let me tell you why Eric Adams is wrong here. As the mayor, you actually have authority over the police department. This was something that people came after Pete Buttigieg about when he chose to fire one of the police officers in his department. This is back when he was still mayor of South Bend, Indiana. He chose to demote and remove the Black police officer who reported the racial incidents that were happening in the police department instead of the police officers that were actually using racial slurs. He chose to target the Black police officer. There were many situations that happened with South Bend police force right around the time when Pete was running for president. There were many of them, and a lot of people didn't know about this, that Black people in South Bend, Indiana, were not happy with the way that Mayor Pete was handling the police department. If you remember, on the debate stage for the Democrat primaries, it was Eric, I think his last name Swalwell. Yes, Eric, who was also running for president in the Democrat primary. What did he say to Pete Buttigieg? He said, "You're the mayor, do something. You can fire the police chief." That is actually true. So for Eric Adams to say here, well, it's not really my place to, comment on these situations before the police department. No, you are the mayor. You are actually higher than the police department, and you do have authority over the police department. Eric Adams doesn't want to sell out his friends because remember, Eric Adams is a former police officer. You got to remember that. He was a part of NYPD. So he's not going to sell out his friends. Even though he's no longer a cop, there's still like that back the blue code that a lot of people still hold, even after they have retired from being a police officer. That's what this is about. Cop out from him. Let's rewind it back a little bit here.
Important not to interfere as the mayor of the city in those parts that the police department has yet to take their action. The police respond to me. And I don't want, if this case goes to trial or anywhere further, I don't want someone talk about changing venues, that the mayor tainted when the police falls under one of his agencies. I dealt with the things that are within my span of control that I've been advocating for from the day one that I got in office. And the DA will make the determination on how to handle this case. And I respect that. I respect DA Bragg's, his job and what he has to do. I need to prevent. And let's be clear, let's be honest. There are more Jordans out there. I said this over and over again. I see them. I talk to them. I interact with them. And so we need to make sure we prevent these things from happening.
So if Eric Adams realizes there are more Jordans out there, and he goes on to say that we need to prevent these things from happening, then shouldn't his answer to the question to the reporter be, no, I do not think it was an appropriate response what Daniel Penny did? Shouldn't that be his response? But he doesn't want to say that. He doesn't want to be held accountable. He doesn't want to look bad to the NYPD. That's what this is really about. So you realize there's more Jordans out there. So you also realize that there must be more Daniel Pennies out there, which means that this could happen again, Mayor Adams. The reporter asked him that question because she is looking to see where he stands on this particular issue, because he is the mayor of New York City. And however the mayor feels about how you can and cannot act towards these types of situations, that can actually hold some weight. Aye.
That is within my span of control.
Mr. Mayor, one more.
What do you want to know me?
The police department's old patrol guide bans the use of chokeholds. Is a chokehold ever appropriate?
Where if the police department bans it, then the police officers must follow that rule. So I cannot be hypothetical on when it's appropriate or not. I know it's banned in the police department, and the police department follows that rule.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So it's banned in the police department, and the police department follows that rule. But at the same time, he doesn't want to tell you whether or not other people should be able to do it. That was not the proper response to that question. He just didn't want to give a yes or a no. He didn't want to be on record. And he didn't want to go against the NYPD. Now, this is really interesting because there is something else happening here. I don't know if you're aware of this, but shout out to Case Study QB for this clip. But Mayor Adams apparently is not looking too good in reference to the Biden administration. And I believe that has everything to do with the police situation in New York City and the way that the NYPD have been treating people in New York City, but also because Eric Adams backed funding the police more, and the crime issue has not been resolved, and more protests have come about. Shout out to Case Study QB. Listen to this. There's something else that's brewing here with Eric Adams and the Biden administration.
So a couple of weeks we were talking about how Biden's re-election campaign was off to a relatively slow start. Now Axios has some previously unreported stories about some drama that's been happening behind the scenes. New York City Mayor Eric Adams was quietly removed from Biden's re-election campaign advisory.
You see this? Scoop. Inside the Biden split with New York Mayor Eric Adams. Now, why would they want to remove Eric Adams from the Biden campaign?
Removed from Biden's re-election campaign advisory board. This was announced in the opening weeks of the campaign with other Democratic Party figures like Senator Elizabeth Warren and others. But it's reflective of this really kind of fraught relationship between the president and arguably the highest profile black mayor in the country over issues like immigration and crime that the Democrats clearly need to be united on, not just heading into 2024, but as a party, as cities like New York and others are dealing with these in ways that the president might not understand. You'll remember in April, Mayor Adams publicly criticized the White House and said that they're ruining and putting the city in jeopardization because of the way that these immigrants have been showing up, because of the way that they've been lacking financial resources or imminent even strategy support from the White House, they say, in these cities. And so we're going to look for how that relationship will not only continue to deteriorate, but whether other Democratic mayors start to come out and say, look, we need more from you guys as this situation is happening.
On Adams, he's made no secret that he sees himself as potentially a White House contender someday. But it is interesting how you mentioned other big city mayors. First of all, if they
Eric Adams is president,
do ramp up pressure on the president, but also we've seen a real trend of like real progressives win. We just saw in Chicago, there's a primary, mayoral primary in Philadelphia today, that Adams, he's not as left as they are, and we'll be interested to see if he faces perhaps a primary challenge when he runs for re-election.
He's not as left as they are. Eric Adams is not left at all. He is a status quo Democrat. Let's just call it what it is. Let's just be real. Now, they mentioned immigration. I don't think that's really what it's about. I think it's about policing. I think that's more what this is about in reference to Eric Adams. So he's already not looking too good with the Biden administration. And I'm pretty sure this incident that has happened on the subway with Daniel Penny and Jordan Neely also does not make him look good in the Biden administration's eyes either. So there could be a couple of things going on there, but it doesn't look good for Eric Adams. And we're going to be following this case to see how things go from here. But I wanted people to fully understand the difference between manslaughter and between murder, because people have already reached out to me and said, why is he charged with manslaughter and not murder? And they are two different things. So I wanted to break that down. But I will say, it sounds like to me that most of you that reached out disagree with the law. And that's something I think that should be revisited at some point. I'm gonna go to some of the comments here and then we'll go to the next story. Oops, sorry, Tori. Black Zen, I'm a former Marine and I can attest to having martial knowledge. Yes, yes. So that's another thing. Like when I said Marines are trained to kill with their hands, it's a form of martial arts. Like I know I took martial arts for a little bit when I was in middle school. And I know one of the things that our sensei taught us is that we're not supposed to practice it in the street. Like it's only meant for, like when we would come into our martial arts class, like it was only meant for that, or if we had a tournament, but we were not supposed to be Bruce Lee or Jackie Chan and just start, you know, busting people up in the street. Like we couldn't do what you see in the movies. We were trained not to do that. You're not supposed to do that. Mr. Baruch says he supported the white supremacist cop system. Yep. Ryan says the NYPD is a domestic military force used to antagonize the proletariat of the highest population density city in the nation. Yeah, does not surprise me. Doesn't surprise me at all.